she was still at the old Goethe Posel at Wits, and I'm literally going back to the early 1980s. So we've come a long way, and I thought a topic such as this, and it is quite broad, as you can imagine, religious iconography in South African art, and religion here is used in a very broad umbrella term. You know, it does not only just refer to Christian iconography. It is wide and encompassing, and everything dealing with spirituality in the arts, I think, can be grouped under that big umbrella. But I want to start with Fiona's seminal exhibition that she curated in 2006 at the Standard Bank Gallery. Because for the very first time she brought together quite a number of religions in that exhibition. What you're looking at here is the cover of the book that subsequently appeared a couple of years later, Figuring Faith. And the next couple of slides, I want Fiona to talk us through that exhibition, about her experiences, what were the conceptual frameworks she worked with, and how she used the space in the gallery. So Fiona, over to you.
Okay, so perhaps maybe just go back to the cover of the book. So if you look at the image on the left, it's the front of the book, and the text on the right is what's on the back of the book. And as Wilhelm said, the book was published in 2011, and the exhibition took place in 2006. And I just want to give a little bit of context about that. I work at Wits University, and we have quite close relationships with lots of other entities within the university. And one of the entities, which is the acronym WISER, the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research, the director, the then director of WISER, who was Professor Deborah Posel, was mounting an international conference with social scientists and thinkers around notions of faith. And their international conference was called Reasons of Faith, Religion in Modern Public Life. And it was a very interesting topic that brought together all sorts of opinions about reason versus faith. And she approached us and said, you know, it would be a great theme on which to base an exhibition. And at that time, the Wits art galleries had been closed, so we were busy fundraising for our new WAM space, which I think many of you might be aware of now. So we were throughout the period of raising money for the new museum, we were busy trying to sort of operate in other people's spaces. So we have a very good relationship with the Standard Bank. And we approached them and said, would they be interested in hosting an exhibition around some of these themes that we thought we would develop for an exhibition around faith. And so the exhibition came about a year after the Reasons for Faith conference, the WISER conference. And it became called Figuring Faith. And it was kind of a way in which to image aspects of faith and using the Wits art, fine art collection, the contemporary art, more traditional art, and then looking at classical art from our African art collections, as well as borrowing from institutions and getting work specifically made for the exhibition. So the image you see in the close-up, the detail of the image you see that says Figuring Faith, which is the cover of the book, is a detail of a work that Penny Siopis did called Good Faith. And I'll go back to it. Is there an image of Good Faith in these slides?
Later on, there are a couple of images.
Okay, so that's just a little bit of context. So you can go to the next slide.
And so here, this is the cylindrical central atrium leading to the galleries beyond. The work that you see there in the background is in the outer lying gallery space.
Right, so the gallery has 2 levels. You come in from the street, and then you can go up 2 staircases, one to the left and one to the right, and then you go up again, and you come into this core space. So there's a kind of a round space in the atrium, and then it kind of abuts onto, or it opens up into a square space beyond that. So in a way, you know, I thought it would be, for me, it would be, I was interested in creating the notion of, you know, coming down into a church and reaching the altar, and putting all the very powerful works in the center that evoked a kind of an altar space. So you are looking at it from the side. So where the fish is that's on the base, the smaller fish that's on the base, that would have been near the entrance. And I included some very important pieces of the small fishes from Jackson Hlungwani's Altar of God, which has the arrow on it at the moment. And the Wits Art Museum acquired the entire Altar of God in 1989. There's about 14 pieces in that, and it's one of the most iconic bodies of work by a South African sculptor. It's by Jackson Hlungwani. The larger fish in front of it was an earlier piece that's called the Mongi fish that also belongs to Wits Art Museum. And then that creature towards the left of it in the front is the Nebuchadnezzar from the Johannesburg Art Gallery, and it's based on one of Blake's paintings of Nebuchadnezzar. And then on the figure that is kind of striding across the trunk is a Johannes Maswangani, and it's called Christ Walking on Water, Jesus walking on the water, and you can see the fish swimming around on top of the tree trunk. So it's kind of evoking as if he's walking on water on the trees.
Yeah, certainly very beautifully conceptualized, I think, yes.
So let's go to the next one. So throughout the exhibition, I tried to juxtapose works of contemporary artists with other works that I selected that spoke to the various themes within the exhibition. So behind on the sort of very loud confession statement with the cardinals and the police batons is a work by Kendall Gears, which we loaned for the exhibition. And right in front of it is a coffin from Ghana, which was made by Ben Soa. And you pick up the wings, and inside the body goes inside. And it's a very large coffin that gets carried. And wooden coffins are part of Ghanaian burial, funerary kind of ceremonial practices, and people often ask artists to make coffins according to their kind of what their lives have been. So, you know, a teacher might be buried in a pencil or a book, or you know, a farmer might be buried in an onion. I think this was a chief. And then in the back corner of the exhibition are some little buck on clouds, mounted on the wall, and in front, you can't really, it's not a very good image from this side, but in front is a kind of a confessional. And that's by the late Peter Schutz, who was in fact my sculpture lecturer in the 1970s. and that's all about going to confession, and it's called But the Clouds, and
yeah. There is later on there is an image where I'll show it from the front.
And then this is a work by Jane Alexander, and I'm sure for her it had absolutely no relevance whatsoever to any kind of issue of faith. It's called Untitled, but it's these kind of metamorphosed kind of skeletal figures that are semi-human and semi kind of animal. They've got animal heads, and they have wax on the skeletons, so they're animal skeletons. They have wax on them and plaster of Paris, and then if you go really close up, you see sort of hair embedded in the wax. So it's kind of, it has a kind of a almost freshly dead quality about it, but not really.
Almost like a reliquary, I think.
Yeah, and then it just becomes more skeletal as you go up towards the top, and less human. And this is from the Standard Bank collection, the actual Standard Bank corporate collection, of Saint Sebastian being shot through with arrows by Peter Schutz. But what's interesting about it is that he's made the Saint Sebastian figure. He's wearing a Zulu married woman's skirt, which is called an isidwaba. So that's very interesting, how he's kind of played with traditional dress. And in on the picture on the right, in the glass case, is one of my favorite sculptures, which I used again in 2010 when I did an exhibition about soccer for the World Cup, and that's from the Johannesburg Art Gallery. It's called Christ Playing Football. And then this is a sculpture that belongs to Wits, to us. It is by Nelson Makuba, who was from the Limpopo, and the late Colin Richards was doing an exhibition during the Biennale, and we were asked. He asked us if we would take this, if we would buy this for our collection. And there were two of them, and the terrifying story about these two works is that the artist tragically killed himself and burnt his artworks with him. And this work and the other work, which is not on the, I don't think it was on the exhibition, this is called Christ on the Cross, and there was another one called Ascension. Both of them, when they came into our collection, they are blackened from the fire that killed him. So in terms of death and, the power of resurrection, and it really is poignant to have these works. And Colin Richards wrote very, very poignantly about them in the Faith Catalogue.
And this is quite intriguing, this kist here and the cloth.
Yeah, so downtown in Johannesburg, there's a Zulu traditional market called KwaMashu. It's near Maboneng. And a lot of Zulu traditionalists buy muti there. A lot of migrant workers are, it used to be a beer depot. And so you can go down there and you can get muti, you can get traditional Zulu beadwork. Now there's a lot of coffins being made down there. And this is a wedding treasure chest that when the bride gets married, this gets given to her as a gift. And they sell them at Mai. So that one's a bit, I think keep going. You can just pass that one. This was downstairs. So what we have here is a divination bowl that's used in divination practices from the Yoruba community in Nigeria. It was one of the early pieces when we started collecting African art. It was acquired in the late 1970s, so it is really one of our early pieces. And juxtaposed with it, and very influenced by the kind of style, is a Deborah Bell. On the right, you can see a sort of a more extended version of it. So, you know, I was playing with artists who refer to various forms within their work, and then things that were absolutely just serendipitous, which maybe you'll come up with later. So you could keep going. So this is, there was a section on the missionary gaze within the exhibition. And so I had a whole series of works that spoke about the missionary gaze. So the black and white photographs behind the two sculptures are taken by the Pentecostal missionary W.F.P. Burton, William Burton, who in the 1930s was living among the Luba in the what was then the Belgian Congo, in the Kasai province, and he developed some form of relationship with the anthropology department at Wits through a relative who was instrumental, was the head of the department, Winifred Hernley. And he would write to her and say, I'm getting this fascinating information. These people are making the most amazing things. He was obviously much more interested in proselytizing them, but he also could understand that he understood that the things they were making were extraordinary, and he wanted to document their belief systems and their ceremonies and their rituals. And he wasn't a trained anthropologist. He wasn't a photographer. He was a missionary. And so she would give him ideas of, how to take field photographs and how to take notes. And then he built up this incredible repertoire of photographs and sent them to Wits, as well as many of the objects that were being made by the people in the community. So those figures with those people with masks on their face, we would acquire those kinds of things. The figure on the left, they're holding a divining instrument, which they are trying to invoke a spiritual presence through moving that object back and forth. We have that object in the collection. So Burton's work people have come from many parts of the world to look at Burton's collection. There are more than 400 photographs that are digitized in our archive. It belongs to the Wits anthropology department, and we are looking after it for them. The two figures in front are of missionaries. The one is by Nelson Makuba, and I don't know, he's kind of half dressed and he's looking a bit sheepish. I'm not sure what his story is, but and then the figure on the right is by Noria Mabasa, and it is called The Clergyman, and he is holding his Bible, and it's a little clay piece. And I thought it spoke very well to the Luba photographs.
Yeah, for sure. There you can see the Peter Schutz.
Yeah. So the idea is that you kneel at the confession, you look through, and instead of seeing the priest, you see these little dacres up in the clouds, which is so Peter Schutz.
And tell us about this Preller. Is it also in WAM collection or what?
Yes. It's called Christ Head, and that's part of the Schlesinger collection, which was donated to Wits in the late 1970s, 1979. It's a really powerful Preller. And then these are two photographs. The one on the left is by David Goldblatt, who sadly passed away recently. And it's of a domestic worker working in Johannesburg, I think in Orange Grove, with her children. And he documented all their names and the date in which he took the photograph in this place, and ended the quote with, all three of them had died of HIV.
Oh, Quite incredible. What I particularly like is this round window, which gives a
Yes,
sort of like a halo,
like a halo, yeah.
which I think is quite phenomenal. And that's why I
And also the
juxtaposed
lights
these
above.
two.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
the lights above, you know, it's kind
yeah,
of
yeah. There you go. Yeah.
so
So I
kind of,
thought these are quite remarkable. This is
that's
by an art. Rotimi.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
a
it. That's it.
Nigerian photographer.
Yeah.
And this is by Johannes Sekokela, and it's called The Devil's Party. And the devils are busy roasting somebody on the spit. We thought we used that once in an exhibition that we had curated about the TRC. Kind of reminded me of what was going on at Vlakplaas, you know.
Sure. Yeah, quite potent. Yes. Here's another image of that confessional, and also these two next to each other. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got the Preller, very powerful 1960s work by Preller, juxtaposed. I don't think they were right next to each other in the exhibition, but they were on the outer reaches of the upper floor, probably facing one another from across the big divide. But the one on the right is Christ at the Column, and it's by Judith Mason, and I can't see the side of it because I've got people in my view. Maybe
yeah. Okay, just moving on, these works as well.
Yeah, so you've got the image of the cross, you've got the cross burning. The one on the left is a large drawing by the artist Fikile, and on the right is The Angel Chases Satan by John Mofokeng, the Namibian artist who worked in lino cut. Yeah.
Okay. So this is Andrew Chabanku, and I really like this because it shows different places where people can sort of practice their religion. In this case, it is Joubert Park, which is quite nice. These ones are some of my absolute favorites, all by David Goldblatt.
All David Goldblatt, yeah. Just so often just quite kind of bland, but he but so powerful at the same time, and so iconic.
Yeah.
I mean, the way he's got that steeple and the mast, the trunk and the steeple next to each other, very powerful images.
Yeah. And even interiors of churches such as this one. This is also David Goldblatt photograph.
Yeah, and Federico Freschi writes about this in the catalogue, and he talks about the holes punctuating the corrugated iron and the little, church space that's been fabricated, and how they kind of look like stars in the sky with sunlight shining through.
Yeah, lovely. Santu Mofokeng.
Santu Mofokeng, this is in the essay in the book, it was written by Michael Godby. Santu, sadly, so many people are not with us anymore. Santu passed away. So those are caves and clarins where people worship over the Easter period from different faiths. It's not only one faith, it's a few different faiths come together in these caves.
Yeah, quite remarkable. I really, really like them. Yeah. Here is the Penny Siopis that you mentioned right at the outset. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is Penny. This was as you came into the museum. So the first thing you see there are two fixed glass cabinets that are quite narrow. And you need to kind of put sculptures in them, or work within the confines of the spaces. So Penny made this work specifically for the exhibition. This has never been made before by her, and she's a great collector. She's a real magpie, and she wherever she goes on her travels, she collects things. And she reuses them over and over again in different permutations in her work. And this work is called Good Faith, and it's the first thing you see when you go in on the left, and it's a pile of debris, basically. It's just like a pile of junk, you know, if you don't consider what's in it. And it's basically relics, icons, Madonnas, saints, Hindu deities. There's a plaque there that says African Native Mission, Church Mission, and there's a prayer shawl that I think belonged to Philip Miller on the pile. And they're very haphazard. It's almost like they've been dumped out of a truck or something. As well as a bottle of holy oil from Kwakuze in KwaZulu-Natal. There was some rose water that she'd got from Greece. And I think, and hovering above it is this skeleton, which is actually a human skeleton. And on the skeleton, she made bread dough, which she attached to the skeleton, and it kind of set and sort of started falling off. So there were drips of it on the pile of the debris of all the different kinds of faith. And I think it sort of, it represents, in her essay in the chapter, she has a conversation with Achille Mbembe, and he was like, so what's with the dough, and she was talking about how the skeleton rises above, the significance of the skeleton rising above how earthly life is not finite, and in order to be seen in a finite way, things have to be in the flesh. And if they're not in the flesh, then they become spiritual, then they cross over to another realm. There was also a reference to Ezekiel and the hallucination and in the valley of the dry bones from the Bible, and in the Bible he is told that the bones will rise up and the flesh will come back and they will breathe life again. So there are all those kinds of references. And I suppose, the thing of you do something in good faith is that you honor something. And which faith is the top faith? I don't know. There are many faiths.
This is also probably one of my all-time favorite works, a sculpture made of coal, literally coal. It's in the Sasol art collection. And the idea is that there is a real burning halo fed by this gas bottle, and that the work itself would sort of burn itself out. It's sort of like a type of iconoclastic work, so to speak.
And change shape along the way.
Yeah, you also had this in the central atrium, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, Fiona, thank you very much. And at any point during the rest of the presentation, if you want to jump in with a comment or a question, please feel free to do so. But what I thought of doing was to give the audience a sense of what else was available. Certainly, Figuring Faith, your exhibition was absolutely a seminal exhibition, but there were other shows as well, chief of which was probably this one, Personal Effects, but this was on a different shore. This was in New York, at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, and you have two volumes. I'm showing you the covers of the catalogue. This was in 2005, so not many people actually saw this exhibition. But the whole cathedral was used for massive artworks and installations, such as this one by Jane Alexander in front of the main altar. And you can see many of anthropomorphic figures occupying this particular installation. The famous the Botha. Milipa Pieta was also there, just underneath those beautiful stained glass windows. This is a close-up of it, and I'm sure many people actually had the opportunity to see this work for themselves at the Norval Foundation sometime, I think, last year. Churchill Madikida, this was his installation. And the interesting thing is his use of video work, such as you can see on the screen here, because he's basically referencing the AIDS crisis. Because I think his sister at this point had just died of age. Mutsungu, Samson Mutsungu, with these huge burial trunks. There was a whole performance of him sort of dying and being buried in this coffin. And then there's a miraculous resurrection when he jumps out of this trunk-like coffin. We happened to sell one some time ago. I think it was last year. This was the particular work of his that we sold. A work by Johannes Pokela, also installed at the cathedral, and he is famous for repainting famous works from the Renaissance. This is an Ascension scene, but he changes it into sort of this cage being hoisted up into the highest heavens. So always these quirky twists that is so characteristic of his works. Sculpture by Claudette Schroeders. It's a type of Eve figure, if you like. There's a snake around her neck, and she's also trampling on another one. So quite an evocative work there. This sculpture is by Clive van der Berg, and it reminds me very much of those medieval effigy figures of kings and queens that are buried in the cathedrals. Very powerful work by Dan Victor, and she calls this the 8 Marys, different aspects of Mother Mary, of course, that she is depicting here. At home, back in Johannesburg, some other exhibitions dealing with religion in a specific way is this one by Jackson Hlungwani. This is from 1989, an exhibition curated by Ricky Burnett in Newtown. He is, and I think you mentioned, his work. This is the New Jerusalem, the installation that in Limpopo. That was sort of like an ongoing artwork, and it looked something like that. So that was 1989. In 2014, an exhibition, sort of a mini retrospective, if you like, of Wim Botha at the Stevenson Gallery, with this phenomenal sculpture here, carved out of old Bibles. You can see the front and back here. And in 2015, another dimension of religious art in South Africa was added by Hassan and Hussein Essep. In 2015, they also happened to be the young artists at Standard Bank Gallery, introducing sort of Islamic art and subverting some of the religious practices of that, and addressing taboos, so I don't know whether I need to explain this. In Islam, it's very unlikely that people would be drinking Coca-Cola. Right, so those are some exhibitions that would be in the public imagination, but what was written? So, and sadly, I have to say not much. So, and it is strange because I checked Esme Berman's standard work, Art and Artists of South Africa, and there's absolutely nothing to do with religious art in South Africa. So I had to look somewhere else. The first one I came across was this Festschrift, Art and Articles. It was, of course, presented to Heather Martinchen on her retirement from Wits in 1973, and in it is a wonderful essay by Judith Mason. It is called A Prospect of Icons. And she looked at her own use of religious iconography, especially the biblical figure of Judas, but she also refers to other Renaissance art. This was 1973. 1978, you have Frida Harmsen looking at South African art, and there is a section of religious art in this particular book. And she mentions, of course, Judith Mason, Maud Sumner, Cecil Scottness, and also, very interestingly enough, all those wonderful tapestries woven by Rorke's Drift, telling the biblical stories. Moving on, in you already mentioned, the importance of the missionaries in terms of art. This article by Elizabeth Rankin and Elsa Miles, looking at the role of the missions in art education in South Africa, because so many of our most important black artists were actually trained. Gerard Sokoto, Ernest Mangoba, John Kakana, they were trained by actually missionaries. The Prophetic Nun by Guy Butler, and he talks about the art of Sister Margaret, Sister Pauline, and Sister Dorothy Raphael, and the manner in which they decorated many of the rural churches and religious spaces dotted all over the country, especially in KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape. The idea of the Black Christ also being depicted there. This is from on the left, Christian artists of Natal, and you see an example of the work. This was from 2002, this particular publication. 2004, the art of Santa Sofia, Frida Harmsen again, and she's looking at the mural that was installed in Santa Sofia in Pretoria. It is a work, The Last Supper, that we, Strauss & Company, sold in 2013. And then in 2005, Polly Street, the story of an art center, many examples of religious art in here. My favorite image in the whole book is the image on the right. I would imagine at the service I'd be staring at that mural, the Cecil Scottness mural in the back the whole time. Around about the same time, this idea of art and religion was taken up, was included in the school curriculum. Believe it or not, quite progressive at that stage. It just underwent a major overhaul, a rewrit of the outcomes-based education, the disastrous outcomes-based education of the mid-1990s. And chapter 4 specifically deals with art, craft, and spiritual works, mainly from rural South Africa. Okay, you can criticize that, but at least, they included John Mofokeng, Jackson Hlungwani, Noira Mabasa, and the likes. And so that brings me to the lots on auction here. There are around about, I think, 35 works that deal in a direct or in a tangential way with religion of whatever kind. And I thought, to make sense of it, I needed to develop a couple of categories, and these I ran past my Dominee brother, and he said they are of the same conceptual congruence. And first of all, I thought of looking at religious spaces and places. And then moving on to rituals and practices, going on to gods, goddesses, deities, celestial beings, custodians, and martyrs. And then lastly, looking also at mediators between heaven and earth, if you like, and lastly looking at the different faiths. So here you are looking at wonderful work by John Piper. He is known for these works. It is a unique work. Yeah, he also, of course, did a number of prints, but very evocative, especially the very dark sky and the much lighter, brighter side of the entrance to this particular cathedral. Airbrush work by Norman Catherine, and I promise you the work on the right is a church. I discovered an earlier version of this little church. Look at the pointed arch, for instance, over here. And in an earlier version of this, there is, in fact, a cross above the arch there. But you know, as the title signifies, it was a time where the role of religion in the political dispensation under apartheid was questioned. A Temple of the Sun, another religious space or place, if you like, wonderful work by Alexis Preller. He, of course, did other versions of this particular temple, such as this one, and paying homage to the sun. I think this is Helios, temple of the sun, this particular one. And what is interesting about this work is that when you look carefully, some image, some face, some portrait might emerge from all of this. Perhaps this might be a face there as well. I think it can also reference a type of palimpsest, if you like, an ancient manuscript that is sort of re-inscribed with calligraphic type of images. One of my favorite works is this one, The Gates, and also by Alexis Preller, and it reminds me of the famous Gates of Heaven and Hell made by Rodin. On the, as you can see on the image of on the right, Rodin had a commission. The commission was never executed. I'm talking about 1909, but it was much later, when the Rodin Museum opened in Paris, that these gates were actually cast. Now, the gates, of course, an entrance to a spiritual place, I think it is fairly well known that Preller was very taken by these religious and architectural features, such as the Mudif that you see here, built on the swamplands in the Middle East. And his architect friend Norman Eaton developed or designed a Mudif for him with, of course, these Zanzibari doors installed here. It was a project that was never completed, but the idea of those doors acting as gates into a spiritual place, I find quite fascinating. Probably one of my favorite Preller works is this one, The Tower of Babel. On the left, it is in the Pretoria Art Museum collection, another structure, another gateway between earth and heaven, and clearly based on the Bruegel painting that I'm showing you on the right, of these stellar images or ancient monuments. Wonderful examples there as well, where you get the same sense of sort of doorways to spiritual places. Preller visited some of temples. This is in Delphi in Greece, for instance, and this is also in a way another type of gateway. Those two faces looking at those profiles, looking at each other, might as well constitute a type of gateway, emphasized by these architectural features, another type of gateway leading up to sort of an altar or a monument over there. Speaking of rituals and altars, if I may just look at some religious practices or rituals. a fantastic example. The Surreal Minoan bulls here used in rituals, and a motif that Preller often used, such as this one. Again, look at almost the encasement, the architectural features that enclose the bull, and of course the bull used in African rituals, in African religious rituals. And we some years ago we sold this wonderful example. Surrounded, the image surrounded, very small, but the image surrounded by Ndebele beadwork and framed in a wooden frame carved by his friend Zaki Yelofani. Another type of ritual, I think represented in these three works by Greg Marinovich, especially the work on the right, which is some type of pilgrimage. They are sold as individual lots. The Baptist community here, and here you have a pilgrimage represented by this particular photograph. Okay, we have a special guest among us, Tracy Payne, the artist of this work, and I took my key from the title of this work, Pray for Rain. Tracy, talk to us about this one.
Okay, thank you, Wilhelm, and thanks, Fiona. I really enjoyed seeing that exhibition. It's a pity Pray for Rain wasn't there. Yes, well, Pray for Rain it comes from a body of work I made in 2005, and the body of work was called Sacred Yin, which is the sacred feminine that I was exploring. And I was very much interested in sacred geometry, which is the archetypal geometric forms that underpin all of creation, particularly working with the hexagon, which is the outer shape, and then the internal shapes of the two equilateral triangles, which is one is pointing upwards, you can see with the legs, and then the other one, the shadow behind, is the feminine. Sorry, the one pointing up is the masculine, and then the shadow behind with the blood is the feminine. And I was interested in using. I mean, I don't directly refer to religion per se, but spirituality and religious iconography does come into my work. So that would be the Star of David, which most of us are familiar with. And the Star of David is a spiritual axiom for as above, so below. You know, balance, harmony, and then of course the quite pornographic, well, I wouldn't call it pornographic even, but the explicit, the open legs of the woman are talking about sexuality. So I often bring spirituality and sexuality together, which for a lot of people, they don't make very good bedfellows. But I think it's quite pertinent in these times. And the title refers to, I think, since I titled it Pray for Rain, it presupposes a drought, in a sense, whether it be a spiritual drought, an economical, an environmental, a philosophical, whatever. Someone or something, we are going through, I am going through a drought in terms of harmony and balance of this. For me, I might be wrong, but I feel a sense of the feminine archetype being still very much subjugated and oppressed and silenced, etc., etc. I won't get too heavy about it, but this is the flag I'm flying. I want balance and harmony and integration and love and da-da-da. So, yeah, it's a beautiful mandala kind of, it is evocative of quite a few spiritual traditions and inspiration and flowers and blah, blah.
And would you say the other work on, and by the way, geez, these works are gigantic. They're very large. Would you say the other work on the sale is also is sort of spiritual?
Well, this one preceded, this was made in 2004, and this work was very much less, it was less spiritual because I was caught up in I was in a different space of feeling in like kind of bondage. And my work is often very autobiographical, personal, but then also universal. So I wouldn't say this is as spiritual overtly, and yet the whole thing of budding yin again is about talking about the birth of a feminine. And you know, it's been a long time since the goddess has been on the, like, standing next to the god, you know. I've explored the Hindu religion, the Buddhism, all sorts of religions, and I'm very much, obviously, I like it when we can work in harmony and stand together and enjoy this world together. So this is about bringing back the sacred. It was working towards the sacred yin, but it was the yin, the feminine energy was still very much caught up in bondage and tied up and exposed and vulnerable, but couldn't really move. And then the later painting, I set the women free, so to speak, and they're very fragile and quite prepubescent even. They're not like women, but at least they didn't have the ropes on them. But interestingly, people love the ropes.
Okay, Tracy, I'm going to throw you a curveball now.
Throw it.
This is called Praying Rainbird. What do you make of that? Praying for rain, praying rainbird.
Yes. Well, I mean, praying is a universal act of communicating with what we don't know really what is. And people try and tell us what that is, that which we pray to. So we all pray, birds probably pray too. And yeah, I mean, I think prayer doesn't necessarily need religion, but I do think we all need prayer.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay. So gods and goddesses, deities, celestial beings, custodians, martyrs, that's the next section. And here we have Raymond Andrews, Almitra, referring to the Hindu goddess of peace and generosity. And it is a figure used in Galil Gibran's The Famous Prophet as well. So there's a reference to that as well. Deborah Bell, The Custodians, wonderful sculpture here. And those of you who listened yesterday, I'm sure heard my colleague Marion Dixon, and she very kindly sent me this slide, where each of these custodians are explained, you know, ranging from conventional Christianity to Buddhism and everything else, and a goddess of a different type, if you like. Atipata Rugas, the sacred versatile queen. I took my cue from the word sacred, and of course. You know, he references the LGBTQ culture, and you have gods and goddesses of a completely different kind, maybe of a secular kind, which I find quite intriguing. Martyrs, and we have two depictions of martyrs on the sale. The first one on the left is by Johannes Meintjes. It is called Sebastian, obviously referring to Saint Sebastian, and this is the title of the work in the middle by Christo Kutsia, completely abstract. And I'm sure those of you who listened to Alistair our head of department yesterday would have picked up where this comes from. It is a sculpture that he carved, and when it was viewed by a group of women, they of course sniggered at the nudity, and he unceremoniously chopped it in half. It is almost reenacting those arrows fired at St. Sebastian. Completely abstract work over here. And it also reminded me of a work we offered, a work by Johannes Pokela on the right, we offered some 2 years ago, also of St. Sebastian. But the interesting thing about this version is the AK-47 and the body plugs that you see lying in front of him. So quite phenomenal works. Celestial Creatures of Another Kind, another inkjet work by Norman Catherine, and perhaps more secular angels than, I would say, religious ones. The angel figures, look at these wonderful wingspans of this composite work by Wim Botha. It's an early work, but look at the wingspan there, and perhaps a fallen angel on this side. Angel on a Donkey by Maud Sumner. Maud Sumner, deeply spiritual person, very religious. She also wrote religious poetry. This particular work is important because it is sold to raise funds for the Walter Battis Museum in Somerset East. They got this work because when the museum was opened in 1981 by Murray Squinrad and Walter Battis was still alive, Murray wrote to every single artist in South Africa asking donations for the museums in the form of artworks. Many artists responded. Maud Sumner, for instance, gave 2 works, and they were exhibited in a special room in the museum. But of course, the museum has fallen on very hard times, and they now have to generate some income. And so we are dealing with this particular work. Just to give you a sense of her religious art, the angel on the donkey might have well been Mary and Joseph. This is, of course, the flight to Egypt. This wonderful work. I think probably my favorite work of Maud Sumner is the one on the left. It is called Mary and Martha, in a secular woman in a secular setting, which I find quite captivating. The image on the right is of St. Agnes. She also depicted, I started off by talking about religious places and spaces. She also painted this church and even decorated churches with stained glass windows. This one she designed for a cathedral in Nigeria. And this mother and child, which brings me to another category, that the mediators between heaven and earth. And I want to use mother and child as a shorthand, Madonna and child, mother and child as a shorthand. And we have a couple of wonderful examples of mothers and children, such as this one by Dumile Feni. The idea of an African Madonna, I think, is well depicted in a work such as this. Another mother and child, this time by Andrew Verster. Very interesting work because you can see it is sort of cut up. And what Andrew did was he took an image of one of his works. He literally cut it up in sort of the format of conventional postcards. And these he would post from Paris and from London when he was there in the 1980s. This is the flip side of it. And you can see the different stamps, the different dates. And these he sent to Jill Adelson, who was the curator of the Durban Art Museum. And miraculously, they all arrived. and they were assembled again, and we have this wonderful work. Now, this is part of what is known in art history as mail art, M-A-I-L art, and many artists actually also use this because it's a very interesting alternative way of presenting your work. It's getting way out of the conventional white cube space. And you have examples such as Titu Zungu on the left, where he used old postcards and decorated it with these aeroplanes. And Fiona, if I'm not mistaken, you included one of his works on your migrant exhibition fairly recently on the cover of that book.
Yes, it was on the cover of the Migrant Sea book. And yeah, we have a large collection of letters with decorated envelopes by Tito Zungu in the Standard Bank collection.
Certainly very, very fascinating works. The work in the middle is by Kim Lieberman. What she did was she sent these letters to herself, to various parts of the world. Posteressante, and of course she had no intention of flying all around the world to collect these works, so they were returned. And then on their return, and this took about 18 months for everything to be returned, she would recreate a world map, placing these returned works on that vast map. So quite an interesting mail art example, this particular one. And the one on the right is by Kendall Gears. And I think, as you can see, a comment on the previous political dispensation. And it is only recently that the idea of mail art has been resuscitated under COVID, because many American artists actually use that as a means of communicating their work to the rest of the world. The idea of mother and child, of course, is very long, and you can do a whole history of art by just looking at early examples, such as this medieval example by Giotto, mother and child, how Raphael depicted the mother and child in the Renaissance. In the 17th century, you have Rubens over here, in the 18th century, Dominique Ingres over here, and even in the 19th century with the Pre-Raphaelites on the right. That is an example of the Madonna and Child by Marion Stoker, sort of a relatively unknown Pre-Raphaelite artist. And it was only towards the end of the 19th century that there was a marked shift from the sacred to the profane, for example, in the expressionists' depictions of mother and children, like you can see in the example on the left by Mary Cassatt, the American expressionist living in Paris. And this was her preferred subject matter, mother and children. You know, when you look at her art, virtually all of it deals with that. And Picasso, from his classical period that you see, 1920s and 30s that you see on the right. But there is a shift away from the sacred, if you like, to the profane. And that brings me to another example of a mother and child in the form of a sculpture, this time by Edoardo Villa. The interesting thing about this sculpture, it's monumental. It's close to 5 meters tall. But when you look at it from the side, you can actually see the child in this part and the mother towering over it. And the interesting thing is that the mother's stomach also acts as the head of the child, which I find quite fascinating. Another mother and child, completely different from the first one, this time also by Edoardo Villa. And what I find interesting about this is the synergy it has with a mother and child carved by Job Kakana, so, a sculptor, a contemporary of Sekoto and Ernest Mangoba in Limpopo, all taught by Sister Pauline. The last section, and I see we are over time. So the last section I thought of looking at different faiths. This work by Helen Sabidi references traditional African religion. But we also have Christian religion represented in these wonderful works by Keith Alexander. Old Testament and New Testament stories such as Noah's Ark, the Testaments, Moses receiving the Testaments on Mount Sinai, on the way to Bethlehem to be counted for the census, the Magi following the star to Bethlehem, and the crucifixion and the empty tomb. These 6 works sold as one lot, again to raise funds for another institution, this church in White River. This work. And then just 1 or 2 things about this. It is a little morals, part of Deborah Bell's contribution to the collaboration between William Kentridge, Robert Hodgins and herself. And I just want to point out one of these etchings where you have the clergy here in conversation with a layman discussing the idea of the fall. And the expulsion from Eden. Another type of religion, if you like, in the 1980s, there was the notion of what was then known as liberation theology, and I think Alfred Thoba is a good exponent of that. Interesting title. Look at the title there. God, may you, can you? Pleading for some intervention to relieve the suffering under apartheid. He's better known for his political work, such as this one, referencing June the 16th, with Hector Peterson being carried, his body being carried in the front. But there were a couple of other, like religious works, such as the Tree of Knowledge that he depicts here. And another version of that tree of knowledge. I also want to group Guy Tillam in this category of liberation theology. Again, I'm taking my lead from the title, Leopold and Mobutu, accommodation here, of course, the iniquities of the colonial Leopold and the first, the liberator of the Belgian Congo, I think well represented in those 2 works. Maggie Laubscher, this work, these 2 works on the sale. She, of course, raised in a Calvinist tradition, but soon embraced Christian science, the idea being, the presence of God in nature, and you would hardly, everything is always emblazed in full sunshine. There are hardly any shadows in her work, and that is also a religion. I'm nearing the end here. I'm getting back to Andrew Fuster. What I'm showing you on the left is sort of a mid-career perspective from, covering 1994 to 2008. And one of the works on that exhibition is the one on the right, Notes on a Crucifixion, which I find quite interesting because you have the arms here and the legs of a crucified body, but of course swapped around. But the curious markings and tattoo things remind me of religious tattoos that you would often find on people's bodies there. And that, when we keep that in mind, a work such as this, also on our sale, makes a lot of sense. Andrew Fuster, of course, was a Hindu. This is sort of a red deity, and this is the elephant temple, Ganesh a revered deity in the Hindu religion. He also did these paradisial scenes, or primordial or primary landscapes, what he calls, and the fall of man out of that, and again, which sheds new lights on the lot that we're selling on the right. I promise you I'm nearing the end. Very interesting body of work by Norma Dunn, because they also references different religious African trident. The trident, of course, Neptune, and in Greek mythology. This one is Shiva and the bishop, maybe the bishop represented here. And this tomb-like shroud here, which reminds me of Judith Mason and Wilma Stockenstrom and their artist book, Skoenlappe Hevel, Skoenlappe Vrou. The last page in that book has these 4 tombstones here, and there is a unique drawing in that book. The poems written by Wilma Stockenstrom and the artwork by Mason, and it tells the story of the 2 children frolicking in the graveyard and drawing these lovely images in crayon on the tombstones. And I suspect this is the very last one. So on the one hand, you have Judith Mason, and on the far end of the gliding scale, you have avant-garde art frolicking around the tombstone of Pirnief. Okay, that's my story.
Thank you
so much. Thank you so much, Wilhelm. That was wonderful. I mean, I am always amazed by your extensive knowledge that you so kindly share with everyone. So thank you very much for putting together such a wonderful presentation. And thank you.
You're welcome, and a great thank you for Fiona and Tracy, who contributed, I think, in a most interesting and captivating and fascinating manner.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was so nice to relive that exhibition, Fiona, and thank you, Tracy. It's so nice to get an artist's context behind the work and to hear an artist speak about their work. It really is special, and thank you very, very much. Is there
I would like to say thank you to Fiona and Tracy. Fiona, I didn't see your exhibition, so I was hanging on every image, wishing I'd been here to see it. The other thing I'd like to say is that unfortunately there's been a massive Eskom power outage across the country, and I've had the WhatsApp's been going most of the talk because a lot of people wanted to be on it, but their Wi-Fi, we've all become so used to our Wi-Fi at home. So it's recorded, and we will forward it to the people who sadly have not been able to get onto their Wi-Fi and their computers this afternoon. So Eskom won't have the last moment on this fantastic lecture. But thank you all 3, because what a great treat on a Friday afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome.
And is there any questions from anyone? If you would like to ask anything, you're more than welcome to just unmute your mic. Okay, otherwise, unfortunately, our talk on Monday on the wine has been cancelled, but we will return on Tuesday. On Tuesday, we're having a talk from some of our Cape Town specialists on the Cape art that will be featured on the auction. On Wednesday, we have a very special guest. We're doing the SABC collection. On Thursday, we're doing the 1940s, War, Exile, and New Beginnings. And then on Friday, we have... Oh, I forgot what the Friday one is. Well, on Friday, we're doing the Swinging 60s with Wilhelm again. So that's also going to be a very exciting one. So I hope everyone has a good weekend, and we look forward to seeing you again on Tuesday.
Thanks, Arisha.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
How do I get out of here?